Here and welcome to another episode of Meaningful Live. Ayahuasca. Is it a spiritual experience? This program is dedicated by Robin Blumenthal in loving memory of Leah Bas Moshe Yechiel Reich, mother of my dear friend Helene Wasserman. So let me begin with an important disclaimer. I'm not an expert on ayahuasca or on DMT or on mescaline or on peyote or on magical mushrooms or on all the other psychedelic, whether synthetic, man-made, or natural plant medicines. The perspective I'm coming from is the focus on spiritual experience. What it means, how does one reach that state, what are the risks involved, what is a healthy way of experiencing it, and so on. I'm neither here to come to endorse or to invalidate the use of any medical, whether it's plant medicines or other forms of interventions. It's very clear, and just for a responsible disclaimer, that any given situation needs to be addressed case by case. Go to the proper authority that you trust, medical authorities. Keep focused on what you want to accomplish in any given situation, just as it is. No one's going to take any medicine for the heart or for diabetes without a clear diagnosis and understanding why you're taking the medication and what's its purpose and measuring results. And the same thing with anything that addresses anything that we ingest and anything we experience in life, especially things that are more intrusive, that affect the very consciousness and the very experience of life. So that type of responsibility, I think, is a given, but it's important to state, especially when you're dealing with new experiences and things that we're not so familiar with. I think it's also very clear, and many have already pointed out, that we have to be careful and always wary of fads, the fetishization, the commoditization, the commercialization of any item, of any substance, of any experience that people want to cash in on, or in some other way benefit, or sometimes it may even be with good intentions. So we're talking about a mature approach to this topic, and that's why I want to focus on the spiritual experience part. Let's first define, what does a spiritual experience mean? What does that mean? What does the word even mean? So it really comes down to our perception of things. We look at the world around us on a very basic level. We experience the world on a sensory level. That's where we begin. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. We see things, vision. We hear things. We taste, touch, and smell. Obviously, with intelligence, we come to discover pretty early on that there's more. There are things that you can't experience with the senses we call supersensory. That can be with our minds, with our feelings. You can't taste or touch love. You can express love through the senses, but it's something that's a little more ethereal. And the same thing with intellect. And then we go into the world of intuition and imagination. So we clearly know there's more to reality than what meets the eye. This is just the tip of the iceberg. As you travel inward, and I specifically say inward, it's not upward, it's inward. It's up in the sense of maybe higher states of consciousness, but it's inward. You come to realize an interesting inversion of reality. That what really is reality? Is it the tip of the iceberg and you're happening to fall upon the forces within? Or is it the other way around? Everything begins from within, and the outer is just an outer expression of an inner experience. Or as it has been phrased, are we physical beings on a spiritual journey, or are we spiritual beings on a physical journey? Which then challenge us into thinking, where is reality? Where we begin is not necessarily where we end. It's like climbing the mountain. What does the horizon look like? Traveling into outer space. So the higher you go, the more mysterious it becomes, the more challenging it becomes, because it's challenging what that are givens. So it really comes down to, I don't want to call it a battle, but definitely a tension, a tenuousness between our perceived reality and a deeper reality and a higher reality. So the truth is, a spiritual experience is understanding that deeper reality. But I want to take it a step further. I want to introduce another word, not spiritual, but the word divine. In Jewish mysticism, it's taught that there is the material experience, which is the sensory one. There's the suprasensory, which is the spiritual experience. And then there's the divine experience, sometimes referred to holiness, sanctity. What distinguishes it? A critical piece. And that's critical in understanding spirituality. And that is a Hebrew word that I'd like to introduce. The word is called bittul. Bittul, B-I-T-T-U-L. What does that mean? It's a combination of humility, modesty. I like to refer to it as suspending yourself to experiencing something greater than yourself. Why is this vital? Because you can be spiritually arrogant, just as some people are materially arrogant. I'm arrogant in my spiritual superiority, in my deeper awareness. I've reached these higher states. So a critical component, you can say a ticket, to enter the world of spirit, to enter the world of the divine, is humility. If it's about me, I want to experience it too much, that's always going to be a challenge. I want to experience ego death. Is that coming from your ego? Is that coming from really true egolessness? Now, I'm not getting into in people's intentions. We all always have mixed intentions. We can have ulterior motives that lead us to deeper places and so on. But it's critical to understand that in this journey, and most important thing of all, it's about truly experiencing something beyond yourself, not because I want the experience, not because I want to enjoy it, but because I want to be absorbed in reality. I'm looking for truth because that is true, not just because I like it, or because I don't like what I have right now. So the true spiritual experience is all about the above. Now, this is why it's critical that when you enter that place to really be very careful. Because you could say, what's the day? So what? I'll have a spiritual experience. What's the worst thing? Well, we have a statement in the Bible, a very famous statement, where Moses, who was greater than Moses? The great prophet, the great spiritualist, the one who experienced God like no one else face to face. He asked God to see his face, to experience God intimately. And God says, no one can live, no man can see me and live. What does that mean? Because if you see me, you become me, and then it's no longer you. So it's not just a simple process. When someone says, I want to see the total, utter, naked truth, without any filters, without any distortions and so on, is that really something that we're capable of containing? I'll just use an example. Somewhat of I don't like this example per se, but it just drives the point home. A little child could have intimacy. A little boy and a little girl, but most of us would not recommend that. I say most, I say all of us wouldn't. It's just too much for them. Not because intimacy is a bad thing, because when you enter that type of intense emotional experience, and I would say even beyond emotional, you're going into a whole new domain and you have to have the right containers. And that's why you'll find in the Bible, and you'll find in different texts, experiences, people who went to spiritual higher states of consciousness, and they didn't come back to tell about it. Because it's not that easy to integrate and internalize. This is not meant to be a warning. It's meant to be truly respecting the dignity of that experience. But in truth, to use an expression from Hasidic thought, the truth is that is true reality, and our reality is just the surface outer reality. Here's the expression. It's a very powerful expression. I'll try to translate it as best as I can. I'll first say it in the Hebrew. The reality is elikus b'pshitus and elamus b'yischachus. True reality is the divine, higher, infinite, beyond structure, beyond definition reality, and our defined, finite, parametered reality is actually the novelty. But we experience the exact opposite. We experience the defined, structural reality as reality, and we see that divine, undefined essence as being a novelty, something we're looking and seeking. So in truth, it's not just about seeking and finding it, it's actually discovering that the whole thing is upside down. And that's why the great, great mystic, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, 16th century mystic, explains that the only way reality as we know it could exist is through a concealment. In other words, consciousness and awareness as we know it is actually a state of blindness, a state of limited blindness, I would say, because it's not airtight, but blindness. Why? Because if we experienced that reality in an unadulterated, an unfiltered way, we would completely be lost. not just overwhelmed. We would simply disappear. So he introduces the secret of the tzimtzum, it's called, the concealment, where everything is turned inside out. That when we look at the hand and the glove, we all would understand the glove is just a garment for the hand. But when you turn it inside out, you suddenly think the garment is more important than the hand. So there's an invisible hand, there's an invisible forces, there are invisible energies within all of existence. And this isn't only on the psychedelic level, it's on the psychological level, it's on physics. I mean, what is more real? The matter that we touch, or the molecules it's made up of, or going a step further beyond the molecules, the atoms, and the subatomic particles and the subatomic particles? Is it the basic human organs, or is it the cellular structure, the DNA, the genetic material that's invisible? We'll understand that that's the reality, and this is the outer expression of it. So everything was inverted. So when you look at existence, you're actually looking at everything in a sense from the outside in. If you look for the inside out, it's a very different experience. So every object on existence, everything, the apples in your refrigerator, your coffee beans, I'm talking food, everything in the animal world, in the world of vegetation, the world of mineral world, the human world, every cell, every fiber of existence really is like an outer seed that has tremendous amount of energy within it. Today on a scientific level we understand it, but it's spiritual energy. And when you travel there, that's the true reality, and the reality that we perceive is a very limited version of it. Just a small myopic picture of that essential place. The question now is, if that's reality, wouldn't we all want to experience it? Wouldn't that be able to, if we were able to go there, we'd be able to transcend everything that we live. I'm not even discussing yet the whole discussion about dealing with traumas and pains and suffering and all the distortions of our superficial world. We all want to go there. I mean, to use the classic words of William Blake, if you were to cleanse the doors of perception, we'd find how everything is in its true reality, infinite. And it's only because human beings have created a limited vision that we experience, the way he puts it, is in this narrow, cavernous vision. I'm paraphrasing more or less. Aldous Huxley, of course, wrote his book, The Doors of Perception, as a result of his psychedelic mescaline and other trips that he took, based on that poem, The Doors of Perception, of William Blake. So the truth is, that is reality. But what would happen if a person enters there unprepared? A person enters there not properly assimilated and acclimated. It would be like looking at the sun in full brightness and would blind us. That's what happens when you experience even sunlight, let alone such deeper levels of perception. And that's why there has to be a method how to get there. So the mystics and the spiritualists throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, have discussed this. This is what they've done, starting from Abraham, starting from Adam and Eve, even in the Garden of Eden. And as I said, there were methods that have been developed. The question, of course, is, what is the healthy method for this? And I'm talking about for the spiritual experience, for experiencing that deeper truth, that higher truth. So I want to quote, I want to consider myself humbly as a student, as all of us are, trying to understand these matters. As I said, I'm not an expert, not in ayahuasca, I'm not an expert, frankly, in any given area. But I have done my share of study and my share of exposure. So I will quote someone in my lifetime who I consider my spiritual mentor, known as the Rebbe, in a letter where he writes, and he is a spiritual expert. He writes interestingly, I just want to read. When he was asked about the psychedelics, namely LSD, he said, biochemistry is not my field, and I cannot express an opinion on the drug you mentioned, especially if it is still new. However, what I can say is that the claim that the said drug can simulate mystical insight, etc., is not the proper way to attain mystical inspiration, even if it had such a property. The Jewish way is to go from strength to strength, not by means of drugs and other artificial stimulants, which have a place only if it is necessary for the physical health, in accordance with the mitzvah to take care of one's health. I hope that everyone will agree that before any drugs are taken, one should first utilize all one's natural capacities, and when this is done truly and fully, I do not think there will be a need to look for artificial stimulants. So let's make a very clear distinction right now between the medical use of something and the use of it for spiritual gain or spiritual growth. Medical, there's clearly, in medicine, there are, thank God, many medicines that have been developed, both synthetic, man-made, others plant-based, others based on different chemicals, that were implanted in existence by God himself and said, use them to heal. So if we're dealing with a medical situation, even the greatest spiritualists will say if a person's dealing with a medical, whatever it may be, whether it's depression, whether it's trauma, whether it's physical, whether it's diabetes, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's other things, you need to go to a medical professional, someone that is an expert. And if you don't know who's an expert, go to several and get an opinion about another, do the proper research, because you're dealing with serious things, and let the professionals determine. Now, if medication is necessary, what medication? And we all know there's a lot of experimentation. What works for one may not work for another. And the same thing, people who talk about, and I know this from individuals who have used different psychedelics or plant medicines for particular medical situations, and it has indeed helped. So I would say this outright, that what I would offer here, again, I'm not a medical expert, is to speak to medical experts that you trust, and more than one is always best, so you get several opinions, just like you would do if you were dealing with heart surgery. Anything intrusive, anything invasive needs to be addressed properly, and define not just what are the pros and cons, but also what the purpose is. You're not going to take a medication for whatever it may be, for calcium deficiency or for diabetes, unless you know what the purpose is. And you want to make sure it's fulfilling the purpose. So it cannot just be out of desperation because nothing else is working. It has to be focused and has to be responsible. That's on the medical side. As far as exclusively a spiritual experience, here's the issue. Of course, it's possible that the divine planted into plant medicines and to other experiences and other physical things in this world the ability to so-called induce and stimulate what we would call, let's say, a mystical experience. Because basically what it does is that the brain's perception, as I said, the doors of perception can be cleansed, but you could do this by forcing it, which means you haven't earned your way, you force the issue, and you're entering a place of that internal unity, which is why many people who have experienced psychedelics will say you go beyond time and space, out of body. Ego death, losing your ego, losing that subjective identity where you get dissolved and absorbed into something greater and higher. Getting to the root of things, getting through all the clouds and all the distortions that have defined your life. So there's no question that is possible. But is that the way? Even if it's possible, even like he says in this letter, even if it's true, is that the way? And have you earned your way? And can you come back and integrate it? So one could argue, 1 second, other methods haven't worked. I've tried religion, I've tried prayer, I've tried methods, many people will say, and it just doesn't work. Now, why doesn't it work? Let's say because the practitioners, the teachers, the rabbis, the leaders are themselves not capable. They may be knowledgeable, but they don't know what it means to have a spiritual experience, what it means to have a divine experience. So we have no choice, so we have to try other methods. Or is the challenge, perhaps we need to create, or I wouldn't say create, to revisit. What was the first healthy way that people experienced these higher states of perception? To go through history and start a new way of educating ourselves. Let's look at it this way. Children, as they're born. When a child is born, so we all know the child does not yet have the distortions, even though there are arguments about generational trauma, which is itself debatable. But the bottom line is, I will argue, that children are pure like freshly fallen snow. Let's go with that approach. Then life takes over. Parents, no one's perfect, parents are imperfect. Environment, education, society, and all the toxins, both physical and psychological and emotional and spiritual, that enter into a human being's psyche. And now we have all these distortions, the fears, the insecurities, the pains. Our identities are completely shaped very often by what people expect of us. The shame involved, the guilt, going on through all the neurosis. What do you do now? So one can argue that, okay, if we have something that can just cut through, and even though it induces a state of going back, we'll call it to the childlike purity, that seamlessness. We'll call it the pre-symptom seamlessness, or the pre-tree of knowledge seamlessness and innocence. then why not use it if it can be also integrated? Or perhaps what we need to do is, instead of creating in simulated states, to go back, how can we reclaim that childlike state? How can we reclaim that innocent state? To me, it's always been a fact that if Judaism, or for that matter, I don't even like the word religion, I don't like the word Judaism either for that matter, but I'm just using it as a label. If it were to mean anything, it means that it gives you tools and instruments to experience that deeper level of perception. And I'll just use one example. I'll use an example. I did a workshop presentation, a paper a few years ago, science and spirituality parallels. And I spoke about the concept of this higher state of unity where you become absorbed into a oneness. And basically everything else melts away, the distinctions between people, between time and space, and so on. And I quoted interesting. We all know there's a classic talk, one of the most popular TED Talks, delivered by Jill Bolte Taylor. I'm quoting, "From my stroke of insight, a brain scientist's personal journey." She was a neuroscientist who actually went into it because her brother was schizophrenic, and she wanted to understand the workings of the brain. And then, as luck would have it, as God would have it, as any way you want to put it, she suffered a stroke that paralyzed her left side of her brain. So it was on the right side of her body, left side of the brain. And she writes, fascinating, that what she discovered and experienced, that our right hemisphere, quote, functions like a parallel processor, while our left hemisphere functions like a serial processor. They care about different things, and dare I say, they have very different personalities. Our right brain perceives the big picture and recognizes that everything around us, about us, among us, and within us is made up of energy particles that are woven together into a universal tapestry. Since everything is connected, there's an intimate relationship between the atomic space around and within me and the atomic space around and within you, regardless of where we are. So the right human hemisphere thinks in pictures, and it learns kinesthetically through the movement of our bodies. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems. Our left hemisphere, on the other hand, is in a very different place. It thinks linearly and methodically. It is designed to take that enormous collage and start picking out details, and more details about those details. It then categorizes and organizes all that information, associates it with everything in the past we've ever learned, and projects into the future all of our possibilities. And our left hemisphere thinks in language. So there you have. She writes much more about this. So what would we be like if we entered only into the right brain? We'd have the unifying element of seamlessness, but we wouldn't be able to live exist and survive in a detailed world. Like she explains, you'd see the toothpaste, the toothbrush, your mouth, but you wouldn't be able to put them together because you only see their connection and not the details. In other words, it's critical that we live in a structured existence. Even though it's true that the true reality, cleansing the doors of perception, is that unity, but we need to bring that unity into our structure, and that's why God told Moses, no one can see me and live. For you to see me, you need to absorb, you need to elevate, you need to sublimate yourself, prepare yourself to the point where you're ready, your containers are expansive enough to experiencing me in that essential sense. So the goal is to reach there, but it has to come through suspending ourselves in the fullest sense of the word. And the way to do that in a way that we earn our way is through the work, the hard work that we do. And the mystics actually explain the hard work. They say it requires exertion, a lot of effort, and it requires commitment. Commitment to a higher cause that's not your self-interest. That's why the commoditization and any of the personal gains that may come from anything actually defeats the purpose. The greatest spiritual people I've met, you're not going to see headlines about them. They're not going to brag about it. They're definitely not going to sell it because it's not about them. It's about a truth that they have the privilege and the honor and the humble honor to channel. So you see here that not just in the world of psychedelics, but in the world of psychology, in the world of physics, and definitely in the world of spirituality, that is the reality. It's not just some novelty. That is reality. But the challenge, and you can say the purpose of life, is how do we channel that reality into our structured existence? How do we join the right brain and the left brain, because that's what we need to do. To use definitions to experience that which is beyond definitions, to express the inexpressible. And there are many methods to do so. So, in the final analysis, is ayahuasca a spiritual experience? Are psychedelics a spiritual experience? It depends. My answer would be, I don't think the experience is the spiritual. Spiritual experience is experiencing the truth of something. How you got there is critical as well. Because if you got there not through your own natural means and through your natural effort, one could wonder how spiritual it really is, even though it may be an exact simulation, and it may be a true experience as far as entering that place. But did you earn your way? Were you allowed in? Did you do the proper work that's necessary to go there? And again, I want to absolutely qualify this. We're not talking about medicinal now. We're not talking about healing. We're not talking about that's a whole other discussion that needs to be discussed in the proper context. Now, of course, someone could argue, 1 second, I have these traumas, I have this suffering, I have this pain, and the only way I can get through it is I need the medicine, one medicine or another, to get rid of those blocks. So that too is a discussion case by case to see. If someone says, I'm so blocked, I can't experience the spiritual in the natural way. There are methods, I understand, but I can't even begin to exercise those methods. Well, this needs to be looked at in a very serious way and a very mature way. It cannot be seen again as a fad. Oh, I'm going to try this out and let's see. It has to be seen in a very professional and again, in a way that's ultimately leading you to personal responsibility. And that's ultimately a litmus test. What results from these experiences? Is it the responsibility to come back and bring that truth, that deeper truth, into our reality? If that's what happens, and it builds your family, and it builds your relationships, and it builds your relationship with your spouse, and your commitments, but if it creates recklessness, or creates, now I've experienced this oneness, so therefore I don't need to have structure in my life any longer, and it basically upends structure, is that the purpose? Because remember, the goal here is not just experiencing the oneness, it's bringing the oneness into structure. That's the ultimate purpose and goal. Now, this topic obviously needs a lot more than just 1/2 hour or whatever amount of time we've dedicated to it. And I intend to speak about it some more because I see this challenge that we have now as a wake-up call. The fact that so many people are asking this question, that's why I addressed it, frankly. It wasn't just out of curiosity. Whether it's ayahuasca, whether it's the other forms of psychedelics, again, different methods, different medicines, and so on. That excuse me, is alone to me not about whether they're finding the solution, is the hunger, the need for answers is telling me that there's a spiritual quest out there. And yes, there's a place where spirituality overlaps with healing because they go hand in hand. As a matter of fact, they began together. The spiritual leaders were the healers. Now, the word ayahuasca, just for the record, I don't know if you know this, but it comes from a Peruvian language, from the Quechua language, where aya means spirit, soul, corpse, actually, dead body, ancestor, and huasca means vine, rope. So some call it the vine of the soul. Now, I don't want to go that far because that's their name that they gave for it, and perhaps there were indigenous and other tribes that use it for that purpose. But it's interesting that they associate spirit and death in a certain way, ancestors, and additionally to the fact that you probably know part of the vernacular out there is that some call DMT the spirit molecule or the soul molecule, and some call it the God molecule, different forms of DMT. So because people are experiencing this type of element, as I've heard from a few people who have definitely experienced it, have said, it gave me, even though I'm not a religious person, it gave me the idea that reality is far purer than I've learned to believe. I feel healing is possible. It opened up possibilities. Now, it's interesting. For myself, learning Kabbalistic teachings, mystical teachings, Hasidic teachings, have opened me up to understand these realities, and frankly, not through any substances. So I look at it, I hope, in an objective way. People tell me, unless you experience it, you can't know. Well, what happens if you experience it through prayer? What happens if you experience it through music? What happens if you experience it through connecting to that deeper part of your soul where you actually sense and feel that unity? You can't experience it, people tell me, unless you do it with psychedelics. Well, I don't know if that's coming from humility or from arrogance or from why they're so convinced. I said, well, you haven't tried what I'm ready to offer you. But the point here is not to stand on principle. My point is that we all have to be humble in this journey. It's a spiritual journey. It's not about you. It's not about me. There are time-tested methods. We also know the risks. We also know that it has to be integrated and it has to lead to fulfilling our purpose in existence. What's the ultimate goal? Spirituality is not a goal of its own. It's because it's coming back that you were sent to this world for a purpose, to bring these higher truths and recognize that this sensory world, this defined world, is a platform, is a vehicle for that which is beyond sensory, beyond definition, that highest and highest reality that we are here to channel. The right brain, left brain, joining. The quantum indeterministic, channeling that into the deterministic. And even beyond the indeterministic, because there's a place that is neither deterministic nor indeterministic. And that is ultimately the highest divine experience, where we get absorbed and lose ourselves. That you feel completely, you no longer exist. You are just a channel to a higher reality, and you're not annihilated in the process. So I hope I did some justice to this very elaborate and important topic. This has been Simon Jacobson. I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed presenting this. Talking about it itself is somewhat freeing and liberating, but of course experiencing it. And at the end of the day, the good deed you do, the simple act where you go out of your own self-interest and you help another person, reaches these deepest and highest levels. It may be the deepest experience of this highest truth that you'll ever experience. Try it out in the simplest way, has no side effects. Simon Jacobson here, Meaningful Life Center. Please, meaningfullife.com is our website. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share with others. I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comment, your critique, everything. This is an exchange of the harmonious symphony that we are all part of, and all indispensable parts of, as well as necessary and complementing each other. Thank you so much. Be well and be blessed.